So, I mean, they say that first impressions matter. Um, so that's something that is pretty relevant to most corporates. Is where do people first get to experience you? So sometimes it's a product, sometimes it's a service, sometimes it's a brand, sometimes it's when somebody's interested in a role that's been advertised, and we started to think about the impact that Alexander Forbes has in that moment when somebody is interested in a company from an employment perspective. The other big kind of first impression moment is the onboarding moment when the person walks in the door. So I don't know how many of you can remember what that was like, but it probably doesn't take too much thinking about it to not come up with a long list of things that didn't go that well. Stack of paper, filling in forms multiple times, making huge number of important decisions, often feeling unsupported, and being rushed through that process. So there seems to be a. Can you hear me at the back? And on this side? Okay, great, thanks. Sorry, maybe there's a dead spot over there. So we've done quite a bit of research, and what we found out is that everybody really dislikes this process called onboarding. So employees don't like it, and you'll remember from your own experience, HR really doesn't like it because they're being asked all these questions that they don't really feel equipped to answer. After all, they're there to manage talent and look after the people experience, not a whole lot of paperwork. And our own administrators actually really dislike it as well. They've got to go through a stack of papers with a whole lot of squiggly handwriting and try to interpret that. So, yeah, I mean, we've spent a lot of time observing these sessions at employers, and what we found out is that people are making a huge number of really bad decisions on this first day when they join an employer, and that 90% of people never actually revisit those decisions. So we think that aside from the experience that the employee has when they walk in the door at a company, we've got an opportunity to actually make a difference in terms of what people get out of that moment. So now to get back to the topic, I mean, we've found from our experience of building digital solutions that it isn't good enough to do this, bit of process efficiency here, let's improve that form, and let's make it 5% more effective. So what we've said is we actually need to take a journey approach. We need to take into account the needs of all of the stakeholders in that process and try to understand what their pain points are. So before we go and rush off and build a digital experience or an app, we need to actually understand what we're solving for, who we're solving the problem for, and who's going to use the solution. So what we did was to embark on a ethnographic research process. So we went and we did in-depth interviews across the country with people from all walks of life, employed people, as well as people in HR, trustees, and other stakeholders in this process. And we then distilled that into 7 insights. And each of those insights gave us a design challenge in terms of our digital solution. So if I had my slide deck, I would now be showing you a picture of the series of movies, because what we did is we said instead of the current paper-based laborious process that everybody dislikes, we'd actually like to roll out the red carpet for our members and for employees at corporates, and that's the kind of experience. So we gave all of our insights a movie theme just to sort of make them more memorable. So the first movie was the movie Too Big to Fail. And that movie was about the abdication of responsibility for the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, where everybody went, it's their fault. And what we found is that in spite of the fact that we've been moving from this defined benefit space to a defined contribution space from a retirement perspective for the last 3 decades, employees sort of think, well, I work for a corporate, I work for a multinational, somebody is taking care of this, I'll be okay. So never mind that they haven't ever preserved their savings, never mind that they've contributed at the lowest level, you know, it will be okay, somebody will take care of it. And then also in that whole process, human resources practitioners are taking on roles that they aren't actually equipped to deal with. So financial advisor, for example. So, you know, there's a perception financial advice is really expensive. It's only for an elite few. And so HR is seen as kind of a satisfying solution when it comes to this onboarding process and asking the questions. So the design challenge for this is really how do we get people to take the right amount of responsibility, and how do we give them the tools to do that? So the next movie theme is based on the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and we called the insight The Good, the Bad, and the Undervalued. And the reason for that is that nobody understands their benefits. So employers are investing, thank you. Employers are investing all of this money in employee benefit programs, and there's some kind of minimal understanding as soon as people have gone through the experience, but you know, you ask days or weeks later and there's absolutely no recollection. And we don't really help in terms of that, because the way we communicate with employees about the value of their benefits is we give them 2 equally pointless numbers. The one is how much money do you have in your fund, and and that's like a big telephone number. So people think, well, it's more money than I've ever seen in my life, I'm sure I'll be okay, never mind that they actually need double that to maintain their standard of living. The other thing we tell them is what their net replacement ratio is. And nobody outside of financial services actually understands what that is, and some people inside financial services. And the best comment we had from somebody was, well, my net replacement ratio is 51%, so that's a pass, I'm okay. You know, so we really have to think of a way to make these benefits more tangible and more relatable, so that the investment that we're making actually pays off in terms of employee actually being able to value what they understand instead of what we have now. So the next insight is based on the movie Borg, which is about Bjorn Borg, the #1 tennis player, who retired at the age of 28 and was in retirement for 8 years. And in that time, the world had moved on from wooden tennis rackets to graphite. So before his first match, he was asked why he was still playing with a wooden tennis racket. And he said, well, it's what I know. It's always worked for me in the past. And he came out of retirement. He played the 157th seed. He got completely thrashed. He played 2 more matches and went back into retirement. So the head of HR at MTN said to us, and it's quite a kind of quote that stuck with us, that we're trying to use yesterday's tools to solve today and tomorrow's problems. And so we, you know, it doesn't matter what question employees ask us relating to their benefits, our answer is you must just save more for retirement. And we have to understand that in South Africa, the situation is much more nuanced than that. So that's only a quarter of how people on average survive in retirement. People have got all these other sources. So when we're speaking to them about this money that's a fraction, and, you know, given how often people change jobs and have left money, you know, people are saying, well, you don't understand me, it's not relevant, and they disengage. So, you know, that's really a challenge that we have to, you know, how do we become more relevant and talk to people in a more inclusive way. So, for example, what we do now is, or what we've done now is that we're giving people the chance to tell us what else they have that's going to get them there to their retirement state, so that we can then give them a better idea of what that translates into in terms of the income that they're going to earn. So the next insight is based on the movie Edge of Tomorrow. And the problem is that I mean, everything is about instant gratification, and something like saving for the future, particularly retirement, seems like so far in advance, and behaviorally people discount that heavily and they weigh that up against a very real current sacrifice, and it comes off second best. So the thing is, how do we get people to connect with their future selves? So there was one of the things I wanted to show you was a video which was a face aging experiment that was done, but it was based on research at Stanford University, where people that were shown pictures of themselves aged 10 years saved 200% more than people who were shown pictures of themselves as they were today. So, that we need to kind of weave these insights into what we do so that we can make things more relevant. The other thing is, I've mentioned this stack of forms. It doesn't matter which employer we talk to, they all look the same. The logos and the fonts are somewhat different, but, it's pretty much the same experience. And you fill in all this paperwork and you get nothing back. At some point you might get a benefit statement, but really there's no gratification. So never mind instant gratification. But we really can actually do something about that. We can recognize, well, based on the decisions that you've made, this is what you're on track for, and give back some gratification in that moment. So the next insight is based on the movie Gone in 60 Minutes, and we called it Gone in 30 Minutes, because the part of onboarding where you are now filling in this employee benefit paperwork and making all these decisions is typically the 30-minute slot just before lunch. And it's kind of positioned as admin. And, this is what's standing between you and lunch, on day one. And, so that's the kind of attention that gets paid to this. So we spoke to a broker about this, and the broker said to us, well, everybody thinks that the biggest investment decision you make in your life is your house. And if you think about how long, if any of you have bought a house, how long goes into that, relative to this 30 minutes just before lunch. And it's actually your retirement, the cumulative effect of your retirement savings, that's the biggest decision that you make. So, and the other thing is, because people are rushed and unguided in this process, this 30 minutes, so one session we were observing 40 people sitting in a room, in an auditorium, filling in these forms together, and somebody put up their hand and said, which contribution rate should I choose for retirement? And the HR person said, well, you can only ever adjust your contribution rate upwards. We found out afterwards that wasn't the case. So we should suggest you pick the minimum. So 40 people, heads down, tick the minimum. And as I said earlier, 90% of people never revisit that decision. So, these are the kind of, examples of when there's this, these people that get forced into playing the wrong roles, what sort of happens to try to get through the process. And the metrics of these processes is usually, well, did you get loaded onto payroll in time? Not the quality of the decisions that are made. So, how do we give people enough time to make the right decisions is really the challenge. The next insight, the social network, we found that everybody wants to actually involve the people that these decisions affect in the process, and then to share the results after that. But there's no actual mechanism for people to do that. This onboarding process is fundamentally designed for you to go through on your own. So it really hit home when we spoke to the chief actuary of Discovery on his second day in the job. And he told us that he had spent 2 hours writing an email to his wife. If this happens to me, call this number, quote this policy number, and you can expect to get that. Everybody else told us that they've got a brown envelope or a green folder somewhere in the study, and if anything happens to them, their loved one has to go and sift through this paperwork and try to figure it out. And that can be quite a daunting process, especially at the time when you have had some kind of emotional trauma. So, really the challenge for us there is how do we actually get people to be able to share information and connect with the right people while they're making these decisions. So the last insight is around how using our foothold in this moment. So it's based on the movie About Time. And so just to put this in perspective, we touch 1.4, well, more than 1.4 million members in our funds. We onboard 155,000 people a year. And we're giving them this, really dry, paper-based experience. And we actually have an opportunity to do so much more in this moment. Just to give you an idea, you probably think that the reason that people change banks is because of costs or poor service, but actually the third biggest reason is because they're changing jobs. So it's just the point that I'm making is that it's a time in people's lives where they're thinking about a lot of different things. They might be thinking about moving. They clearly, a lot of them are changing banks. And they might be thinking about eating healthier. They might be thinking about managing their money better. And how can we use that moment to actually offer them other things? So an example, something like You Cook, for example. We could present that at the onboarding moment at no cost to the employer or to ourselves. And that could be something that would be relevant for certain people. Other people are going through this onboarding moment. We're talking to them about money, and all they can think is how debt stressed they are. So isn't that the perfect time for us to talk to them about managing their debt better and presenting them with assistance? So this insight is, how do we turn this moment into something that acknowledges that people, when they change jobs, are actually looking for a new and better life? So with those kind of insights as inspiration, we realized one fundamental truth, and that is that this journey needs to start way earlier. When a person is thinking about changing jobs and looking for a better life, and that is when we need to start engaging. The other thing that we found is that HR practitioners said to us that they don't feel that there's a great way for them to showcase their value propositions at that moment. So we've kind of done something about that as well. And then also managing the actual sort of recruitment process. There's a huge amount of, we're using Outlook and Post-it notes and things like that. So we've built something to assist HR with that, to manage that process. So we came up with 70 features that we need to build, and we decided to start somewhere. And we decided that, we kind of mapped on the anatomy of a relationship, and we said that a relationship starts with chemistry. So we decided we want people to fall in love with the fund, which sounds like quite aspirational, and with their employer. And so those are the things that we started to build. So the two things that I've spoken about, the HR employee value proposition elevator, the HR assist. We've also built a profile builder so that people can capture their details once as it's relevant to them, as opposed to all at once. As you go through the process, that's what you do. The other thing is people battle to understand their offer letters. So we've pulled out all the salient details from offer letters. We've given people a safe sandbox to play with their things like their contribution rates and their retirement contributions. And we actually show them the income impact that will have on their retirement income and when their money will run out. And the age. So, and the other thing we want to do is to say, well, if your money's going to run out at 75, can we show you a picture of yourself aged to 75? Because you actually don't look that old. And that kind of, because people always underestimate how long they're going to live. So we actually trying to get them to understand that better. Sorry. So the other thing that we've built is a transition assistant. We found that people battle to resign. So we've had a bit of fun with that. So we've got some resignation letter templates, you know, where you can say, well, it's not you, it's me, or it's definitely you. But there's some other really important stuff like managing that transition. So how do you stay covered with medical cover, for example? And then also, what do you do with your investments? So helping people navigate through that. And please note that there's no kind of HR needs to help with this. It's all kind of something that the employee is empowered to do by themselves in their own time with the right input at the time when they're making a decision. And then the last feature that we've built is the portfolio selector. Which is, well, it's actually called a benefit customizer. So it helps people navigate through the process of selecting their funds. You know, we've seen scenarios where there's 10 funds available and people will allocate 10% to each. And, you know, that's really not ideal. So we've built a tool to help people do that. So the other thing, we're not just stopping with onboarding, we're busy with reboarding, we're busy with exits, and we're busy with retirements. Basically all to kind of take the burden that on HR away from these processes that they experience in terms of these processes and help people make good decisions by giving them the right information and the right tools at the right time. And I was going to show you what all of these things actually look like. And so that you could get a feel, because I know it's quite difficult to kind of, picture it. But it's really, the other thing that we're doing is, because you're joining an employer, you need to have your, the employer needs to have their presence. So we've managed to do something that is branded for the employer, and that really looks, like it belongs and fits in with the employer's kind of the employer experience. So I would, if anyone's interested, we'd love to give you a demonstration so that you can actually experience what employees will experience and what we've built. So please feel free to give me a call. Hopefully my details will be somewhere. But I actually had a slide with my email address on it as well. But so I'm not sure, Sue, what plans there are for making contact. But please come and see me if you would like my details. Anyway, thanks very much. Are there any questions?